In March of 1918, a massive USS Navy ship left Brazil headed for Baltimore. It was called the USS Cyclops, and it was carrying 306 men. It never arrived. No SOS signal, no wreckage, no oil slick, no lifeboats, no bodies. In over 100 years, not a single piece of that ship has ever been found, even though modern sonar can now map the ocean floor in incredible detail. To this day, it remains the single largest loss of life in United States naval history that wasn't caused by combat. And here's the thing. When people talk about the Bermuda Triangle, they almost always bring up Flight 19 or the 5 Navy planes that disappeared in 1945. That story gets all the attention. But the Cyclops came first. It's stranger, and it barely gets mentioned anymore. So today, we're going to talk about the disappearance almost nobody brings up, and why out of every ship or plane lost in that stretch of ocean, this one might be the hardest to explain. Let's back up for a second, because the setup actually matters here. The area we call the Bermuda Triangle is a rough patch of the Atlantic Ocean between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. It's not an official designation on any map. The name itself wasn't even coined until 1964, when a writer named Vincent Gaddis published a magazine article calling it the Deadly Bermuda Triangle. Before that, people in the shipping and aviation world already knew the area had a reputation, they just didn't have a catchy name for it. Since then, the triangle has become shorthand for basically anything strange that happens on the water. Compasses spinning, radios going dead, ships vanishing in calm weather. A lot of that gets exaggerated or flat out invented for TV specials. But if you actually dig into naval records instead of ghost story compilations, a few cases stand out as genuinely difficult to explain, and the Cyclops sits right at the top of that list. So here's what we actually know. The USS Cyclops was a Navy cargo ship over 500 feet long, one of the biggest vessels in the fleet at the time. In early 1918, in the middle of World War I, it was sent to Brazil to refuel Allied ships, and while it was there, it picked up a cargo of manganese ore, a heavy metal used to make artillery shells. That detail is going to matter in a minute. The ship was commanded by a lieutenant commander named George Worley, and Worley himself was already a strange character. He'd been born in Germany, and rumors had followed him for years that he was secretly sympathetic to Germany during a war the United States was fighting against Germany. Crew members reportedly said he was erratic, paranoid, and difficult to work with. Some accounts even claim naval intelligence had an open file on him, wondering if he might be some kind of saboteur. None of that was ever proven, but it's the kind of detail that makes you sit up a little, especially once you know what happened next. The Cyclops made a stop in Barbados on its way north, which wasn't part of the original plan. Worley told port officials he needed to take on more fuel and food, even though the ship's own paperwork suggested it already had enough supplies to make it home. Witnesses in Barbados later described the ship as riding unusually low in the water, sitting deep like it was overloaded. Some of them said they thought it looked dangerously overloaded actually, for the ore it was carrying. On March 4, 1918, the Cyclops left Barbados, and it was never seen again. No distress call, no debris, no lifeboats, no bodies, nothing. This was during wartime, so people immediately assumed a German U-boat had torpedoed it. That would have been the simple, tragic, but at least explainable answer. Except after the war ended, the U.S. government specifically went through German naval records, and Germany had documentation of every ship its submarines had sunk during that time period, since sinking a large Allied vessel was the kind of thing German command tracked closely. The Cyclops wasn't on any of those lists. No German submarine claimed it, in a war that claiming ship kills was basically a badge of honor. So, it wasn't the enemy, which leaves us with an even bigger question. What sinks a 500-foot steel ship with over 300 people aboard in a way that leaves absolutely no trace and no one even sends out a radio call? Theory number one, and probably the leading explanation among naval historians today, comes back to that overloading detail. Manganese ore is incredibly dense. If it wasn't loaded and distributed correctly in the cargo hold, it could shift during rough seas, causing the ship to list to one side and eventually capsize, and capsize fast. A structural failure combined with a sudden storm could genuinely sink a ship of that size quickly enough that there wouldn't be time to get a radio message out, especially with older equipment. This theory gets extra weight from something almost nobody mentions. We know from weather logs that a significant storm did move through that exact part of the Atlantic right around the time the Cyclops would have been passing through. Theory number 2 is mechanical failure. One of the Cyclops' 2 engines was reportedly already broken before it even left port, meaning the ship was operating on a single engine the entire voyage. Combine a compromised engine, a potentially unbalanced cargo load, and a storm, and you don't need anything supernatural to explain a sinking. You just need bad luck stacked on bad luck. Theory number 3 is the one that gets people's attention: sabotage. Given Worley's background, his erratic behavior, and the unexplained detour to Barbados, some researchers have floated the idea that Worley himself or someone aboard deliberately sank the ship, or that the unexplained stop was connected to something else entirely. Smuggling, espionage, we don't know. No hard evidence has ever backed this up, but the Navy's own suspicion of Worley before the voyage is real and documented, which is part of why this theory hasn't completely gone away. And then there's a detail that honestly should get more attention than it does. The Cyclops had 2 sister ships, nearly identical vessels called the USS Proteus and the USS Nereus. Both of them were also later used to haul heavy metal ore. And decades later, within a few months of each other in 1941, both of those ships also disappeared on similar Atlantic routes, also without a distress call, also without wreckage ever being found. 3 nearly identical ships, same design flaws if there were any, same type of heavy, dense cargo, same general stretch of ocean, all gone without a trace, decades apart. If there's genuinely spooky detail in this whole story, it's that one. It suggests this might not be a one-time freak accident at all. It might be a specific, repeatable failure point, a design and cargo combination that under the wrong weather conditions could take a ship down fast enough and completely enough to leave nothing behind. Now, to be clear, most serious researchers who study the Bermuda Triangle as a whole don't think there's anything paranormal happening out there. When you actually run the numbers, comparing how many ships and planes disappear in that region against how much traffic passes through it, the rate isn't statistically unusual compared to other heavily trafficked, storm-prone stretches of ocean. The U.S. Coast Guard and Navy have both said publicly that they don't recognize the Bermuda Triangle as an area of unusual danger. But statistics don't make the individual cases any less strange. And the Cyclops is a case where you have a genuinely suspicious captain, a genuinely questionable cargo load, a real storm in the area, a total absence of wreckage despite decades of searching, and 2 sister ships that vanished the exact same way years later. You don't need ghosts or aliens for that story to keep you up at night. You just need to actually know the details. Which most people don't, because the story gets buried under flashier, more exaggerated triangle legends. So where does that leave us? Most likely, some combination of a structural weakness in how these ore carriers were loaded, a broken engine that left no margin for error, and a storm that hit at exactly the wrong moment. A tragic but explainable disaster, just one that happened to leave 0 physical evidence behind, which is rare enough on its own to keep the question open. What makes the Cyclops different from most Bermuda Triangle stories is that this isn't some vague campfire tale with no names attached. This was a real Navy vessel with a documented crew list, a documented captain with a documented reputation, and a documented cargo manifest. And yet, over 100 years later, with satellites and sonar and deep-sea exploration technology that can find shipwrecks 2 miles down, nobody has ever located a single piece of the USS Cyclops. Naval historians and deep-sea search teams still occasionally revisit the case, and every so often, new theories or new pieces of weather data shift the conversation slightly. It's entirely possible that someday, someone finds a piece of wreckage that finally puts this to rest. Until then, 3 ships and over 300 people vanished from that stretch of ocean without leaving a single trace behind. And more than a century later, we're still trying to figure out what actually happened to them.